Is Donald Trump the new big bad bear of the Republican Party? Back in the time of Ronald Reagan, they said it was Russia we needed to fear. You know, those people over in Moscow.
There is a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
Well, now the Republicans are afraid of a new big bad bear, and he's right here in this country.
A lot of them would vote for it if it came to vote. But no. Gosh, we might poke the bear. It's a language I've been hearing in the hallways. We might poke the bear. The president might get upset with us as United States senators if we vote on the Corker Amendment. So we're going to do everything we can to block it.
Has it gotten this bad that the Republican Party is no longer driven by a desire to protect the country from a foreign foe, but to protect its own members from getting beaten by its own leader? Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. The transition of the Republican Party is now complete. Once the party that championed cold warriors like Ronald Reagan is now the party that blindly follows its own bear, Donald Trump. Throughout his presidency, Trump has rebuffed Republican orthodoxy. He's also cozied up to the same autocratic leaders Republicans once repudiated. Republicans are learning to pledge allegiance to their leader or pay the price. The New York Times reports a party that once championed free trade has now largely turned to protectionism under Mr. Trump. Sermons about inclusivity have been replaced with demagogic attacks on immigrants and black athletes. A trust but verify approach to foreign policy has given way to a seat-of-the-pants style in which rogue regimes like North Korea are elevated and Democratic allies like Canada are belittled. The president even seems to be towing the Moscow line on some of his foreign policy decisions. According to the Wall Street Journal, Putin gave Trump the idea to stop joint military exercises with South Korea. Well, the current chair of the Republican Party, Ronna Romney McDaniel, had a very stark warning to any Republican who dares to oppose the president. She tweeted, "Complacency is our enemy. Anyone that does not embrace Donald Trump's agenda of making America great again will be making a mistake." Her tweet, which caused some pushback, was a reference to these comments she made on Fox.
Anyone who doesn't embrace the Trump agenda and doesn't recognize the issues that propelled us to victory in the White House is going to be making a mistake.
For more, I'm joined by Yamiche Alcindor, White House reporter for PBS NewsHour and MSNBC political analyst. David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida. And Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post, also an MSNBC political analyst. David Jolly, I want to talk to you about your Republican Party. Is it still there? Is the big bad bear now the man you're afraid to poke? It used to be the Russians. It used to be our enemies. Now it's the leader of the party who is so fearful, so fearsome, I should say, that that's the #1 goal of any elected official. Do not mess, or do not, as Bob Corker said, dare poke the bear.
No, that's right, Chris. Look, the GOP that we knew is dead. It's over. This is the party of Donald Trump, not just because of shifts in policy. We see evolution of policies at time in both parties, but the tone of the party has changed dramatically, and the imprint of Donald Trump has forever changed the party. Consider Reagan spoke to the better angels. Bush 41 spoke to 1,000 points of light. Bush 43 to compassionate conservatism. Donald Trump ushered in tones of American carnage, what a lot of people believe is mean-spirited bigotry. He has led his followers through gaslighting and through lies, and as a result, he has broken the back of the mainstream GOP. It no longer exists.
Well, let me go to Robert Costa on this, because it seems to me the Republican Party used to be somewhat libertarian. A congressman falls in love with a woman from Buenos Aires and says he's on the Appalachian Trail hiking. And they say, well, love is love. Love is blind. He may have made a fool of himself, but he's going to be our congressman. And then the guy did something really evil. He dared to challenge President Trump. He dared to do something that was weirdly unorthodox. What do you make of that? That's the sin you can't commit.
At this point, no one's spoiling for a fight with President Trump in the 2020 primary race. But as a longtime reporter on the GOP, what's surprising is that this orthodoxy from President Reagan has survived so long. Parties evolve, parties sometimes die, and this populism has gripped elements of the Democratic Party and, of course, the Republican Party in recent years as different voters have struggled with the global economy.
But the Bushes pushed. We had the NAFTA. Trump was President Reagan was a free trader. He was a guy that believed in coalition building. George Sr. Bush was a giant at coalition building in the first Gulf War. They used to be proud of their ability to assemble under James Baker, the Secretary of State, our allies. That was a proud aspect of the Republican Party. Now we're cashiering our allies. Robert?
They're transactional, Chris, in this Republican Congress. They tell me they got the tax cut. They got the conservative judges on the different courts, including on the Supreme Court. And so they're willing to have a transactional relationship with this outsider figure who is somehow taking over a party that was traditional, that was conservative, because that's the only way they feel they can survive. They talk to their own voters in their states, in their district, and they say the voters are with Trump.
Well, we'll see what's left when he's gone. Anyway, President Trump commended Kim Jong-un as a tough guy, as Fox News anchor Bret Baier pressed the president about human rights abuses under him. Let's watch that exchange.
You call people sometimes killers. He is a killer. I mean, he's clearly executing people.
He's a tough guy. Hey, when you take over a country with tough people, and you take it over from your father, I don't care who you are, what you are, how much of an advantage you have. If you can do that at 27 years old, that's 1 in 10,000 that could do that. So he's a very smart guy. He's a great negotiator. But I think we understand each other.
But he's still done some really bad things.
Yeah, but so have a lot of other people done some really bad things. I mean, I could go through a lot of nations where a lot of bad things were done.
That's Godfather talk. It sure is. The president's nonchalant attitude toward the North Korean leader's abusive tactics mimics something he once said about Putin. Let's watch.
He's running his country, and at least he's a leader, unlike what we have in this country.
Yeah, but again, he kills journalists that don't agree with him.
Well, I think our country does plenty of killing also, Joe. So, there's a lot of stupidity going on in the world right now, Joe. A lot of killing going on, a lot of stupidity.
So thuggishness is okay as long as you're my pal.
Well, this is not about just...
This is frightening talk.
Yeah,
American
it's not just about a policy shift. This is about values. He is praising... I mean, it's okay to meet with your enemy. We try to do this all the time to negotiate arms deals. We don't like the Iranian leaders. But he meets with this guy who is a thuggish dictator who employs death camps, summary executions, mass forced starvation. And he says, hey, pretty good guy. He's doing this at 27. How old was Hitler when he took over the German government? I mean, he seems to have no feeling for any sense of values, American values or any other. And the scary thing is he can talk this way, and there's not a single political appointee or aide in his administration who finds or takes offense with this and says, I can't work for a guy who praises a fellow who runs concentration camps. And Republicans on the Hill, except for Corker, you don't hear a peep out of them. This is about values. It's not about a change in policies.
Well, it's amazing. I was amazed at this purging because I think FDR didn't even defend our wartime ally Joseph Stalin on the purges and that kind of stuff. This guy is now purging people in his own party. Look at Mark Sanford. He purged him the other night and said, you're out of here. And it worked.
But here's the thing. President Trump was always about a cult of personality. And people aren't scared about President Trump as much as they're scared, as Robert said, about his voters. What you're having is massive amounts of people, millions of people who voted for Donald Trump because they saw just a strong man. They saw this idea of someone who had a lot of money, who was successful. They weren't talking about people that had Republican values or Republican policies. I argue that the moment that he won that nomination is the moment the Republican Party knew that that the party that they knew was no longer there. Because President Trump is praising all these people. He doesn't care about the
but there are people out there. Look, my father was one. There are people that are just sort of cloth coat, regular, not rich Republicans who believed in small government, believed in lower taxes, didn't like communists. These were true values.
But remember, he
what
also-
happened to those people?
Anger.
You say it's the Republican Party. What happened to those
seems
people?
like anger has replaced values. It has replaced the ideologies.
I think you're right.
It's
I think it's
policy.
resentment.
It's all about grievances.
Well said. Retiring Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee is one of the few who dares to speak out against this president. Yesterday, he said that the Republican Party was becoming a cultish thing. That's C-U-L. Let's watch.
Look, we're in a strange place. I mean, it's almost it's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it? It's not a good place for any party to end up with a cult-like situation.
Well, the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., was asked about the senator's comments. Here's what he had to say about Corker.
I think that's ridiculous. I think, if it's a cult, it's because they like what my father's doing.
Okay, fine. Let me get back to David Jolly. You've been elected to serve in Congress by a Republican membership down in Tampa area. Those people down in Tampa, those Republicans down there, have they gotten so angry, as David Corn said, that their anger, their resentment against the establishment of this country is so great it overrides all other beliefs, all other principles?
It is, and those are the cultish elements. And the North Korea example is very informative. Look, this is a president who is historically incompetent when it comes to foreign affairs, but he's not selling his base on his competence or on the merits of the North Korea meeting. He's selling his base on his own strength, the fact that this is a president now that they can believe in, that is, yes, a strong man, but somebody that can stand up to dictators. And notice the underlying element of this as well. A president who retreats from his own peers at the G7, who cannot go toe-to-toe with people equally as competent and supporters of free democracy in a free world. Instead, he positions himself with a much weaker dictator on the world stage to show his base that he is a strong president. They are believing in his strength, not in his competency.
Is this some sort of real it's not populism, or it's sort of know-nothing. Are his people so anti-foreign, anti-even Canadian, anti-European, that they'll take his side against people who are pretty much our people, our friends over there?
I think what he has done.
Do they hate Angela Merkel? Do they hate Theresa May? Do they hate Justin Trudeau? Do they really despise those people enough to join the president and bullying them around?
This is where we have to call President Trump to task for something that's very shameful behavior. The elements of xenophobia, frankly, of racism and bigotry have existed in the Republican Party, but we have seen past presidents shun those elements. Donald Trump has embraced those. It was part of his path to victory.
But also,
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, when you're out there talking to people, there was also this idea that when they heard America first, they saw everybody that wasn't American as an enemy. So I covered the G7. I was in Canada, and it was shocking to see him basically talk all this trash about Justin Trudeau and then get on a plane and not be able to even sign a joint communique with our allies and then come out with a joint statement for North Korea. But the people that I talked to are eating it up. They're saying this is what we wanted. This is what we voted for.
Robert, I think it was Popeye Doyle in French Connection 2, who said, "I'd rather be a lamppost in New York than the president of France." Is that the sentiment of our president today? He'd rather be a lamppost in New York than president of France?
Yes, that is his perspective.
Thank you. That's a good answer. That's a good answer, and I like your short and sweetness. Go ahead.
Maybe I should just leave it there. But, I mean, you can stitch this all together.
Okay.
Okay, well.
Thank you.
I'm just saying, all right, I'll leave it there then.
I love your yes, sir. Let's go. Yamiche Alcindor, David Corn, David Jolly, and the great Robert Costa. A man of few words. Very Gary Cooper of you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.